So now we're on to the second phase of this painting. So remember, we started with a reddish background, and then we've dropped down some of the main elements: arch shape, lighter area, where the water is going to be. And this is also the time to think about if I'm going to use any white or black. I don't want to use straight white, but I might mix up like a light brown, light orange with a little bit of white on here. But I definitely want that to happen in these middle layers. I don't want that sitting on top last because I don't want it to be the first thing you see is the white. I want it to be a little more subtle underneath. So I'm going to maybe build up a little bit of my lighter areas and a little bit of my darker areas and start crafting a little more specifically this shape. I'm still not going to work on details, but I'm now going to keep building up my areas of value and the bigger shape. Like, so we're kind of going from background to foreground. So now we're still thinking big picture, not fine details. One thing that is a good idea, I tend to have like a piece of paper or something next to me, or else I'll use my cardboard or something like that. But especially right now, if I'm trying to figure out what's a good color for this, I can do a few different things. There's a lot of red and orange on here, you know, I got a lot of green. What colors should I mix for a good brown? So remember, complements work. So since I have red and green, I can explore some of those brownish colors. It's not the best brown. If I add in a little bit of white, you can see this is more of a cool color of brown. It has almost like a bluish kind of undertone, and that's really because of this color of green. It's a bluish green, so it actually has a little bit of a cooler undertone. So what would happen if I mix a couple of other colors together? Can I mix this yellow and this blue? Would I get a different kind of green? Definitely. So I'm going to experiment a bit. I'm going to try and get a warmer brown by mixing a couple of other things. So we'll come back. So you can see this green is completely different from this green. Remember, you have primary colors. You can mix a lot of different things. You are limited to this type of blue versus there's a lot of different shades of blue. There's a lot of different shades of yellow. Just remember that this green now is going to make a completely different brown when I mix it with this red. Okay, so you can see this brown is more of a grayish, cool kind of color. This brown is more of a yellowish, warm kind of a color. So obviously I can keep going. At this point, I can use this for on my arch if I want to. I can add a little bit of white to this if I want it to get a little bit of that tone to it. So I'm going to keep going with my color mixing. I'm going to mix up a nice color I'm going to use for my light, and then I'll come back. So you can see I mixed up this yellowy white. I did add a little bit of white. I'm not 100% thrilled with the color, but in terms of hitting the highlight areas, you can see that effect. So since it's still wet, I can come back with a little bit more orangey color. Blend that in, tone down some of that weird, like too light, kind of turns into a pastel color again. Sometimes as you put on layers, you like the effect, sometimes you don't like the effect. So I'm kind of just talking you through how maybe I don't 100% like what I did first, but it's still wet. So now I'm toning it down a little bit. I'm still definitely getting that lighter, vibrant color, but what I have here is a little bit more of an orangey color to brush back into it. So you can see how just that little bit toned down that pastel-y kind of yellow I had. I'm also brushing over some of that lighter color with a dry brush. My brush is not real damp, so what happens as I drag it across is that it's coming across just barely, and so it's really still leaving my other layers. I want the other layers that I put down the other day to still show through. I'm going to touch up these brighter areas, and then we'll talk about the shadow areas. The other thing I'm doing is I'm loading up a little bit of white with some of that orange. So then what happens is I get a little hit of white, but not the whole brush stroke. So it's another effect I can explore a little bit and see if I like that. So you can see over here, I did end up lightening it up quite a bit. I'm okay with some of the pastel-y colors because I am gonna go over them a bit with a little bit more of that brown. But now that I have a little bit of that lighter value on a dry brush, you can see how I'm taking the bit of paint that I have left on my brush, drag a little bit across to just get a hint of the lighter value, and hit a couple of these areas just a tad. I can put a little bit of the lighter value down here where there's going to be some of these rocks. There's a little bit of a highlight here for a rock. So I'm just getting the impression of some of these bricks over to the side, even though it's a darker area. A lot of this will be with the leaves, but there's some definite rocky areas, so I can get a little bit of the impression of those. Just getting a little bit of the brightness that I might need for that rocky area. This is all in shadow. I can put a little bit of a lighter value down here, real loose, for some of those rocks, and I can plan out a little bit. I have steps that are coming here. The edge of it is a little bright, so that lighter value, and I start like thinking through where those the edge of those are. So still not entirely planned out for everything. And then once I get a little bit less paint on my brush, with a little bit more of this kind of effect. I don't want those edges to look a little too much on their own. That's the problem with the dry brush, where it just kind of sticks on its own. If you haven't figured out yet, I tend to not put a lot of straight white into my paintings. It's just a stylistic choice. And I don't use a lot of straight black either. What I'm mixing right now for some of my darker areas to just kind of show you guys and model how to use white and black, like tempered, where it's not straight. This is a little bit of a bluish black. Some of these darker areas, if you look at my source material, I got some darker areas over here. And then this is more greenery, so I'm gonna maybe just drop a little bit, you know, here for shadows. There's a lot of this that's dark but light at the same time, so I got to kind of think through a little bit of options on that as well. And then some of these darker areas, I already had a dark value. I can get a little bit more specific with it and deepen it. But once again, I'm not covering up everything in the background, but I'm getting a little bit more solid. And then where there's a darker value, I've already touched up this other area. So now I can start getting a little bit more specific with maybe a little bit of a darker. So this is a bluish black, and I'm doing the same thing as I did before. I have a little bit of it on my brush, but I also have a little bit of a dry brush effect going on. I can start integrating it a little bit up here, kind of loosely. There's some darker stained kind of looking edges. This is the old bridge in Rome, is what, you know, my source material is. I'm going to still come back to that front edge. This is going to be background. So this is just to give a little bit of variety. But I have that bright edge here. I got a little bit of brick that I'm just kind of getting a little bit of the feel of here. So I'm going to continue on and we'll be back. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking a little bit of that darker color that I had, the black and the blue. What I did was I mixed a little bit of white to get more of a grayish color, and I actually added a little bit of yellow to kind of work a similar color scheme, because this arch color is so different from this, and I still have red underneath all of this that I like and I want to still continue using. So I don't want to cover everything up too much. I'm actually dragging, using the dry brush drag, putting a little bit of that blue in just for unity, and it kind of like dirties it up a little bit in a different way than the orange was, because this is an old bridge. It's almost like a rusty look, but now that I drop in a little bit of blue, it's gonna be consistent with some of those other colors that we got going on. You can see that right now the blue looks like in front, so I definitely have to come back to this like we said before. But at this point I can go forward and start getting a little bit of the colors. There's a little bit of the kind of bluish gray in there. And remember, I'm making a painting out of source material, so I'm not trying to make the exact same color experience. I want to make a new one. So as I go through this, part of this is a trial and error process. I like the orange and the red. I'm going to bring that back. This blue works, but I'm going to have to layer other things over it because all of a sudden it became very flat and two-dimensional instead of having depth of movement. Adding a little bit of the blue on top of this archway, added another element, and then adding a little bit of the blue over these bricks is adding a whole nother thing. When we talk about adding next layers, this is what we're talking about. So I'm going to keep working on it, and then we'll come back for the top level.